The morning sun felt different that Saturday. Maybe it was because Daniel actually had time to notice it. As the CEO of a growing tech company, his Saturdays usually disappeared into conference calls and quarterly reports. But today, his wife Rebecca was at some charity event planning meeting, and he'd promised to take their daughter Lily to the park. Lily was 18 months old now, all chubby legs and curious eyes. She'd just started really walking a few weeks ago, and now she treated every outdoor trip like an expedition to conquer the world. Daniel strapped her into the car seat, her tiny hands already reaching for the stuffed rabbit she refused to go anywhere without. Park, 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 she chanted in that way toddlers do, turning one word into a song. The park was busier than Daniel expected. Families scattered across the grass, kids climbing on the jungle gym, the smell of someone's weekend barbecue drifting through the air. He found a spot to park and lifted Lily out, setting her down on the sidewalk. She immediately grabbed his finger with her whole hand, pulling him toward the playground. They walked past the fountain where teenagers sat taking selfies, past the dog area where a golden retriever was living its best life, past the tennis courts where two elderly men were playing a slow, methodical game. Lily babbled the whole way, pointing at birds and clouds and things only she could see. That's when she saw the pigeons, a whole flock of them, gathered around a bench near the playground. And on that bench sat a woman, pulling pieces from a bread bag and tossing them to the birds. She wore a gray jacket that had seen better years, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her shoes were worn at the edges, and a large canvas bag sat beside her on the bench, stuffed with what looked like all her possessions. Before Daniel could react, Lily broke free from his hand and took off running. "Lily, wait," he called out, jogging after her. But toddlers have no concept of stranger danger. They only see the world as it is, full of wonder and birds and interesting people. Lily ran right up to the woman, her little arms stretched out, giggling at the pigeons that scattered around her feet. The woman looked up, startled. Her face was weathered, probably somewhere in her 40s, with lines around her eyes that spoke of hard years. But her eyes themselves were kind, a deep brown that seemed to soften immediately when she saw Lily. "Oh," the woman said quietly, pulling back slightly as if she didn't want to frighten the child. Daniel reached them a moment later, slightly out of breath. "I'm so sorry," he said, scooping Lily up. She just took off. "She loves birds." "It's okay," the woman said, her voice gentle. She had an accent, subtle, maybe Spanish or Portuguese. "They are beautiful, the birds." Lily squirmed in Daniel's arms, reaching toward the pigeons. "Bird, bird," she insisted. The woman smiled, a sad sort of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She tore off a small piece of bread and held it out toward Lily. "You want to feed them?" Daniel hesitated. Every parental instinct told him to be cautious, but something about the woman seemed safe, harmless, and Lily was already reaching for the bread with determined toddler focus. "Just a small piece," Daniel said, lowering Lily back to the ground but keeping his hand on her shoulder. The woman gave Lily the bread, showing her how to throw it. Lily hurled it with all her might, which meant it landed about 2 feet away, but the pigeons didn't care. They swarmed over, pecking at the ground, and Lily shrieked with delight. "More, more," Lily demanded. The woman laughed, and Daniel caught something in that laugh. A memory of better times, maybe. A ghost of who she used to be. They fed the birds together for a few minutes, Lily completely absorbed in her task. Daniel found himself studying the woman more closely. There was something about her face, something familiar that he couldn't quite place. "She's beautiful, your daughter," the woman said, not looking at Daniel. She kept her eyes on Lily. "You must be very proud." "I am," Daniel said. "Thank you," the woman nodded, and for a moment, they just stood there in the morning sunlight, watching a toddler discover the simple joy of feeding pigeons. Then the woman looked up at Daniel, really looked at him, and something changed in her expression. Recognition flickered across her face, followed immediately by something that looked like fear. Or maybe shame. "I know you," she said quietly. Daniel frowned, studying her face more carefully. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." "Not directly," the woman said. She stood up slowly as if her bones hurt. "But I used to work for you." "Well, for your wife." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. He looked at the woman again, trying to see past the worn clothes and the weathered face. "When?" "A few years ago," the woman said. She glanced down at her hands, at the breadcrumbs stuck to her fingers. "I was her personal aide, her assistant. My name is Helen, Helen Martinez. The name hit Daniel like a physical thing. Helen. Yes, he remembered now. Vaguely. Rebecca had mentioned her years ago, back when Daniel's company was just starting to really take off. He'd been traveling constantly, barely home, and Rebecca had hired someone to help manage their household and her schedule. A woman named Helen who was supposed to be wonderful at her job. But then one day, Helen was just gone. Daniel had asked about it once, distracted by a merger negotiation, and Rebecca had said something brief about letting her go, that it hadn't worked out. He'd never thought about it again, and now here she was, sitting on a park bench, feeding pigeons, looking like she'd been living rough. I remember you, Daniel said slowly, though the memory was foggy. You worked for Rebecca for what, a year? 14 months, Helen said. But it feels like another lifetime. Lily, oblivious to the tension, tugged on Daniel's pants. More birds, she insisted. Helen smiled at her, that same sad smile. I'm sorry, little one. I'm all out of bread. What happened? Daniel asked. The question came out before he could think about whether he should ask it. Helen looked at him for a long moment. Something complicated passed across her face. Hurt, anger, resignation. You don't know? Know what? Your wife never told you? Told me what? She said it didn't work out. That she had to let you go. Helen laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's one way to put it, I suppose. Daniel felt Lily pulling on his hand, getting restless. The pigeons had mostly scattered now, and she wanted to get to the playground. But he couldn't just walk away. Not from this. Listen, he said, making a decision. There's a coffee shop just across the street. Can I buy you a cup? And maybe breakfast? Helen looked at him warily. Why? Because I'd like to know what happened, Daniel said honestly. And because you knew my family and now you're here and that doesn't sit right with me. For a moment he thought she would refuse. She looked like someone who'd learned not to accept charity, not to trust offers that seemed too good. But then her shoulders sagged slightly and she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. But I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that. I understand, Daniel said, though he wasn't sure he did. They walked across the street to the coffee shop, Lily between them, holding both their hands and swinging her legs with each step. People probably thought they looked like a family, father, mother, daughter. The thought made Daniel uncomfortable. The coffee shop was warm and smelled like cinnamon and espresso. Daniel found a table near the window where Lily could look outside. He ordered coffee for both of them and got Lily a milk and a blueberry muffin. For Helen, he ordered a full breakfast, eggs, toast, bacon, hash browns. She protested, but he insisted. When the food came, Helen ate slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in a while. Daniel sipped his coffee and tried to give her space. Lily demolished her muffin, getting blueberry all over her face, completely content. You want to know what happened? Helen finally said. It wasn't a question. Only if you want to tell me, Daniel said. Helen set down her fork and looked at him directly. 3 years ago, I had a good job. I had an apartment in a nice building. I had savings. I had a life. Daniel waited. I worked for your wife for over a year, Helen continued. I managed her schedule, organized your household, handled correspondence. I did everything. And I was good at it. Your wife, she was always so busy, always stressed. I tried to make things easier for her. I remember she spoke well of you, Daniel said. The few times she mentioned you. Helen smiled bitterly. Then one day she called me into the study. Just before you got back from a business trip to Singapore, I think it was. She told me my services were no longer needed. Effective immediately. She had security escort me out. I couldn't even get my personal photos from my desk. Daniel frowned. She never told me that. I tried to ask why, Helen said. What I'd done wrong. If there was something I could fix. She wouldn't say. She just kept saying it wasn't working out and that I needed to leave. Did you get severance? Daniel asked. 2 weeks' pay, Helen said, and she refused to give me a reference letter. When potential employers called her, she wouldn't take their calls. One of her other staff members told me later that your wife had instructed everyone to say nothing about me. Daniel felt sick. That doesn't make sense. Rebecca isn't cruel. I'm not saying she is, Helen said carefully. I'm just telling you what happened to me. What did you do? Helen picked up her coffee cup, warming her hands on it. I looked for another job. But without a reference from my most recent employer, nobody wanted to hire me. I had a gap in my resume I couldn't explain. I tried to get work in other fields, but I was overqualified for some things and underqualified for others. My savings ran out. I couldn't pay rent. I lost my apartment. I stayed with a friend for a while, but that couldn't last forever. She paused, looking out the window at the park they just left. It happens faster than you think, she said quietly, falling through the cracks. One day you're a professional with a nice apartment, and 6 months later you're standing in line at a shelter. A year later you're sleeping on benches and feeding pigeons because they're the only creatures that don't judge you. Daniel didn't know what to say. Lily, sensing the heavy mood, crawled into his lap and stuck her thumb in her mouth. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Helen said. I'm not asking for money. I'm managing. The shelter system has programs. I'm on a waiting list for subsidized housing. I'm working part-time at a laundromat. I'm getting back on my feet slowly. But you were on your feet, Daniel said. Until my wife knocked you down. Helen met his eyes. I don't know why she did it. Maybe I did something wrong and never realized it. Maybe she just didn't like me. Maybe I reminded her of something she wanted to forget. I've spent 3 years trying to understand it. Daniel felt a surge of anger, but he wasn't sure who it was directed at. Rebecca for doing this, himself for being so absent that he'd never noticed. The whole system that could let someone fall so far so fast. This isn't right, he said. No, Helen agreed. But it's reality. They sat in silence for a moment. Lily finished her milk and started to get restless. Daniel knew he needed to get her to the playground soon before she started a meltdown. But he couldn't just walk away from this. I want to help, he said. Helen shook her head. I told you I'm not asking for anything. 6 months later, Daniel walked into the office and found Helen in the break room making coffee. It still surprised him sometimes seeing her there. She looked different now, healthier, more rested. Her clothes were professional, her hair styled. She'd gotten an apartment 3 weeks after starting the job, a small one-bedroom she was slowly making into a home. Morning, he said, grabbing a mug. Morning, Mr. Chen, she replied. She still called him that, maintaining a professional distance that he respected. How's the Morrison project coming along? On schedule. Amy's reviewing the final budget today. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the coffee maker gurgling between them. This was their routine now. Brief, polite exchanges, nothing too personal. Just two people who worked in the same building navigating a complicated history. Helen, Daniel said as she turned to leave. There's something I wanted to mention. Saturday is Lily's 2nd birthday. We're having a small party at the house. Rebecca wanted me to invite you. Helen's expression didn't change, but he saw her grip tighten on her coffee mug. That's kind of you, but I don't think that would be appropriate. I understand. But the invitation stands if you change your mind. She nodded and left. Daniel hadn't expected her to say yes. In the 6 months since Helen had started working there, she and Rebecca had only crossed paths twice. Both times Helen had been coolly professional, and Rebecca had been quietly devastated afterward. But Rebecca kept trying in small ways. She'd set up a fund at the local shelter in Helen's name. She volunteered there twice a month, working directly with women who'd lost housing. She'd even testified before the city council about the need for better support systems for displaced workers. She never publicized any of it, never used it for social media points. She just did the work. Daniel didn't know if Helen knew about any of this. They'd agreed not to tell her, not wanting it to seem like they were trying to buy forgiveness. But word got around in their social circles. People noticed when Rebecca Chen, who used to focus on glamorous charity galas, started showing up at shelters with her sleeves rolled up. Saturday arrived bright and sunny. Their backyard was decorated with balloons and streamers. Lily's little friends from daycare ran around screaming with joy. Rebecca had hired a face painter and someone to make balloon animals. It was exactly the kind of party Daniel had never had as a kid, and he found himself oddly emotional about it. He was helping Lily unwrap presents when Rebecca touched his arm. Someone's here, she said quietly. Daniel looked up. Helen stood at the gate holding a wrapped gift. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, and she looked deeply uncomfortable. You came, Rebecca said, walking over. Her voice was careful, hopeful. I almost didn't, Helen admitted. I sat in my car for 20 minutes debating whether to leave. What made you stay? Helen looked past Rebecca to where Lily was tearing into wrapping paper. giggling with delight. She waved at me through the window. Your daughter. She recognized me from the park that day, and I realized I'd regret not coming. I'm glad you're here, Rebecca said. Really glad. They stood awkwardly for a moment. Then Lily noticed Helen and came running over, her dress already stained with cake frosting. Bird lady, she shrieked, grabbing Helen's leg. Helen laughed, a real laugh that made her whole face light up. Hello, little one. Happy birthday. I'm 2. Lily held up 3 fingers. Close enough, Helen said, kneeling down to her level. I brought you a present. Lily took the gift with eager hands and immediately started tearing the paper. Inside was a stuffed pigeon, soft and detailed, with a little vest that said Park Friends on it. Bird. Lily squealed, hugging it to her chest. I thought you might like to remember the pigeons we fed, Helen said softly. Rebecca's eyes were wet. That's so thoughtful. Thank you. Helen stood up, watching Lily run off to show her new toy to her friends. I've been thinking about that day a lot. How random it was. How your daughter just ran up to me without any fear or judgment. Kids are like that. They just see people. She has good instincts, Daniel said, joining them. Maybe. Or maybe she just hasn't learned to be afraid yet. The party continued around them. Kids played games. Parents chatted and drank lemonade. Someone started a water balloon fight. Helen stood slightly apart from it all, not quite joining in but not leaving either. Rebecca approached her carefully. Can we talk? Just for a minute? Helen tensed but nodded. They walked to a quiet corner of the yard, away from the noise. I wanted you to know, Rebecca began, that I've been volunteering at the shelter, the one on Grant Street. I've been doing it for a few months now. I know, Helen said. One of the women I stayed with there told me. She said you were there every week helping with job applications and resume writing. Rebecca looked surprised. You know, I have friends who are still in the system. Word gets around. I wasn't trying to make a show of it. I know. That's why I'm mentioning it. Because you're doing it quietly. Not for credit or publicity, just doing it. They stood in silence, watching Lily chase another child around the swing set. I don't forgive you, Helen said quietly. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here because we're friends now or because everything is okay. I understand. But I'm here because I'm trying not to let what happened to me turn me bitter. I'm trying not to let it steal my future the way it stole my past. Rebecca nodded, her throat tight. And also, Helen continued, I'm here because your daughter is very sweet and she remembered me. And that felt important somehow. She asks about you sometimes. The bird lady from the park, does she? She has a good memory for people who are kind to her. Helen smiled slightly. I was having a really bad day that day, feeling sorry for myself, and then this little person just ran up to me like I was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. It reminded me that I was still a person, still visible, still worth someone's attention. Kids have a way of doing that, Rebecca said, of cutting through all our defenses and seeing what's really there. They watched Lily for a moment, her squeals of laughter carrying across the yard. The job is good, Helen said, changing the subject. Amy is a great boss. The work is challenging. I'm rebuilding my savings. I have an apartment. I'm getting my life back, and I'm so glad. But there are still nights when I can't sleep. When I remember sleeping in my car, listening to every sound, terrified. When I remember the shame of standing in line at food banks. Those memories don't just go away. No, Rebecca said quietly. I don't imagine they do. And I see you sometimes at the office or around town, and I still feel angry. I still think about how different things could have been if you'd just talked to me. If you'd just asked me about those messages instead of assuming the worst. You have every right to that anger. I know I do, but I'm tired of being angry. It's exhausting. And it keeps me trapped in the past. Rebecca looked at Helen directly. What do you need from me? To move forward. Helen thought for a long moment. I need you to understand that this isn't something that gets resolved with an apology and a job. The damage you did, the trauma I experienced, that's going to be part of me forever. I'm going to have triggers. I'm going to have hard days. I'm going to struggle with trust. I understand. And I need you to be okay with the fact that I might never fully forgive you, that this might always be complicated between us. I can be okay with that. Can you really? Because I know people like you. Rich people. Successful people. You're used to fixing problems, used to making things go away. But you can't fix this. You can't make it go away. The best you can do is accept that you broke something, and it's going to stay broken in some ways, and that's just reality. Rebecca nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. You're right, and I do accept that. I don't need you to forgive me to know that what I did was wrong and that I need to be better. Then maybe that's enough, Helen said. Maybe we can both just exist in this complicated space and see what happens. Lily came running over, pulling on Helen's hand. Come play. Come play. Helen looked at Rebecca, who nodded. Go ahead. She's persistent when she wants something. Helen let Lily drag her toward the other children. Daniel watched from the deck as Helen helped the kids with a game, kneeling in the grass despite her nice clothes, laughing at something one of them said. She looked lighter somehow, still carrying her burdens but not crushed by them. Rebecca came to stand beside him. That went better than I expected. She's trying, Daniel said. You both are. It's not enough, though, is it? Nothing I do will ever be enough to undo what I did. No, but you're doing it anyway. That matters, does it? Ask me in 10 years. They stood together watching their daughter's party, watching Helen slowly rejoin the world of normal things like birthday celebrations and children's laughter. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Helen wasn't healed. Rebecca wasn't forgiven. The damage wasn't undone, but it was something. It was a start. Later, as the party wound down and parents collected their sugar-crashed children, Helen helped Rebecca clean up. They worked in silence mostly, gathering paper plates and popping balloons. It was strangely domestic, almost peaceful. Thank you for coming, Rebecca said as Helen prepared to leave. It meant a lot. To all of us. Thank you for inviting me, Helen replied, and for respecting that I wasn't sure I could come. She paused at the gate, looking back at the house. You have a beautiful family. Don't take that for granted. I won't. Not anymore. Helen nodded and walked to her car. As she drove away, Rebecca felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness received, but perhaps something better. Understanding, acknowledgement. The recognition that healing wasn't a destination, but a process. And that process might never truly end. Daniel came up behind her, Lily asleep on his shoulder. You okay? I think so. Are you? Yeah, I think so too. They went inside together, their sleeping daughter between them, both carrying the weight of what had happened and what could never be undone. But also carrying hope. Hope that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when it wasn't enough, still mattered. Hope that people could survive terrible things and still find reasons to show up to birthday parties and laugh at children's games and believe that tomorrow might be better than today. Hope that broken things, while never quite the same as they were before, could still have value, still have beauty, still have purpose. 2 years later, Daniel was at the park again with Lily, now 4 years old and full of questions about everything. They were feeding the pigeons when someone sat down beside them. Hello, bird lady, Lily called out. Helen smiled. Hello, birthday girl. You've grown. I'm 4 now, Lily announced proudly. So grown up. They sat together in the sunshine, feeding birds, watching families play. It was peaceful, comfortable in a way it hadn't been before. How are you? Daniel asked. Good, really good, actually. I got promoted last month. Amy made me her second in command. That's wonderful, congratulations. Thank you. And thank you for giving me the chance to rebuild. You did that yourself. Maybe. But having a place to start from helped. She paused. I saw Rebecca at the shelter last week. She was helping one of the women I used to stay with. They didn't know I was watching. She goes there every week now, I know. The women there talk about her, about how different she is from other volunteers, how she really listens. She's trying to be better. We all are, I think. Helen tore off a piece of bread and handed it to Lily. I've been thinking about that day we met here, how angry I was, how broken I felt, how impossible everything seemed. And now I have an apartment I love, a job where I'm respected, savings in the bank, friends, a life. She smiled. It's not the life I had before, but maybe it's better because I don't take it for granted anymore. I'm really glad, Daniel said sincerely. Me too. Helen stood to leave. Tell Rebecca that what she's doing at the shelter, it matters. The women there need someone who understands that falling apart doesn't mean you're weak, that sometimes life just breaks you and that's okay. I'll tell her. Helen walked away and Lily waved goodbye until she was out of sight. Then she turned to her father with serious eyes. "Daddy, why was the bird lady sad before?" "Because someone hurt her feelings very badly." "Did they say sorry?" "Yes, they did." "And did she forgive them?" Daniel thought about the question. "I think she's working on it. Forgiveness takes time." "Oh." Lily considered this with 4-year-old wisdom. "That's okay. Good things take time. Like cookies." Daniel laughed and hugged his daughter. "Exactly like cookies." They walked home together, father and daughter, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. And somewhere across the city, Rebecca was at the shelter, helping someone fill out a job application. And Helen was in her apartment making dinner, planning her next day at work, living a life that had been torn down and rebuilt, scarred but standing. Not everyone got the ending they deserved. Not every wrong could be righted. Not every wound could fully heal. But people could try. They could show up. They could do the work of becoming better, day after day, even when it was hard, even when forgiveness never came. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between heartbreak and hope, that was enough. "I know you're not, but I'm offering anyway. At the very least, my wife owes you an explanation, and a proper reference letter, and probably a lot more than that." Helen looked at him with those kind, tired eyes. "Why? You don't even remember me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Daniel said simply. "And because if my wife did this to you for whatever reason, then I need to know why. And I need to make it right." "Your wife might not like you getting involved," Helen said. Daniel thought about Rebecca at her charity planning meeting, organizing fundraisers and galas, helping other people while Helen sat on a park bench feeding pigeons. "We'll see," he said. He pulled out his wallet and took out a business card. On the back he wrote his personal cell phone number. "This is my direct line," he said, handing it to Helen. "Call me tomorrow. We're going to figure this out." Helen took the card, turning it over in her hands like it might be a trick. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel looked down at Lily in his lap, at her innocent face still smeared with blueberry. He thought about what kind of world he wanted her to grow up in, what kind of man he wanted to be. "Because my daughter ran up to you without fear," he said. "Because kids see people more clearly than adults do. And because somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention to what was happening in my own house. Maybe it's time I started." Helen nodded slowly. She tucked the card into her jacket pocket. They finished their coffee in a more comfortable silence. When they stood to leave, Helen paused. "Thank you," she said, "for the breakfast. For listening." "Thank you for telling me," Daniel said. "Call me tomorrow. I mean it." He watched her walk back across the street to the park, her canvas bag over her shoulder, and felt the weight of knowledge he couldn't unknow. Lily pulled on his hand, ready for the playground finally. As they walked toward the swings, Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at Rebecca's name in his contacts. He had questions. A lot of them, but first he needed to think about how to ask them, because something told him this conversation was going to change everything. Daniel didn't call Rebecca right away. He couldn't. Not with Lily pulling him toward the swings, laughing and demanding to go higher, higher, always higher. He pushed her gently, watching her little legs kick out in pure joy, and tried to make sense of what Helen had told him. The playground was full of families living their Saturday morning lives. Fathers pushing strollers, mothers wiping scraped knees, grandparents taking photos. Everyone looked so normal, so contained in their little bubbles of family happiness. And Daniel wondered how many of them had secrets lurking just beneath the surface. After an hour, Lily started rubbing her eyes, the universal toddler signal for impending meltdown. He scooped her up, grabbed her rabbit, and headed back to the car. She fell asleep before they even left the parking lot, her head tilted to one side, mouth slightly open. The drive home gave Daniel time to think. He'd been so absent during that period Helen mentioned. 3 years ago, his company was expanding rapidly. He'd been on planes more than he'd been home. London, Singapore, Tokyo, back to California, then off to New York. Rebecca had complained about it a few times, but she'd also been busy with her own things. Her father's illness, her charity work, the social obligations that came with being married to a CEO. Had he really been so checked out that his wife could destroy someone's life and he never even noticed? Their house sat at the end of a quiet street in an expensive neighborhood, the kind of place where landscapers came weekly and no one ever had to worry about broken sidewalks. Daniel carried Lily inside, her body heavy with sleep against his shoulder. He took her upstairs and put her in her crib, tucking her rabbit beside her. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Rebecca wouldn't be home for hours. Daniel went to her office, a room he rarely entered. It was her space, decorated in soft grays and whites, everything organized and perfect. A wall of bookshelves held color-coded binders and photo albums. Her desk was spotless except for a silver pen set and a single framed photo of their wedding day. Daniel sat in her chair and opened the filing cabinet. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Evidence, explanation, proof that Helen was lying, or proof that she was telling the truth. He found the household files in the third drawer. Bills, contracts, staff records. There was a folder labeled Staff Previous pushed toward the back. Inside were records for a housekeeper who'd retired, a gardener who'd moved out of state, and Helen Martinez. Her employment file was thin. Application, resume, tax documents. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with Helen's name written on it in Rebecca's handwriting. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter of recommendation dated 3 years ago, the same week Helen said she'd been fired. To whom it may concern, it began. I am pleased to recommend Helen Martinez for any position requiring organizational skills, discretion, and dedication. During her time with our family, Helen demonstrated exceptional professionalism and capability. She managed complex schedules, handled sensitive matters with grace, and consistently exceeded expectations. Any employer would be fortunate to have her on their team. It was signed by Rebecca, but it had never been sent. Never even been given to Helen. Daniel stared at the letter for a long time. Why would Rebecca write this and then never give it to Helen? Why fire someone you thought was exceptional? He kept digging. In another folder, he found household expense records from that time period. Regular payments to Helen's account, exactly matching her salary. Nothing unusual there. But then 3 months after Helen was supposedly fired, there were 2 payments to an H. Martinez account. Large payments, $5,000 each. Daniel frowned. If Rebecca had fired Helen without cause, had she tried to give her severance money later? Had Helen refused it? Or was this a different H. Martinez? He took photos of everything with his phone, though he felt guilty doing it. This was his wife's private office, her private files, but Helen's story had been so specific, so painful. He needed to understand what had really happened. Lily woke up crying around 1 in the afternoon. Daniel made her lunch and they ate together at the kitchen table, her in her high chair smashing banana slices with her fingers. She was happy again, the nap having reset her mood. Daniel wished his own problems were so easily solved. Rebecca came home around 3 looking tired but satisfied. She kissed Lily on the head and then kissed Daniel on the cheek. How was your morning? She asked, setting her bag on the counter. Interesting, Daniel said carefully. We went to the park. That's nice. Did Lily have fun? She did. She fed some pigeons. Rebecca smiled, pulling off her heels with a sigh of relief. I'm glad you two had time together. The planning meeting was exhausting. You wouldn't believe how complicated it is to organize a gala for 300 people. Daniel watched her move around the kitchen, so comfortable in this space, so unaware that he knew something. She pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, talking about the event, about which donors had committed, about the caterer's menu options. Rebecca, he said, interrupting her story about the flower arrangements. Do you remember Helen Martinez? Rebecca's hand stopped moving. She stood very still, holding a carton of eggs. What? Helen Martinez. She used to work for us, for you. Your personal aide. Rebecca set the eggs down carefully. Why are you asking about her? I met her today. At the park. The color drained from Rebecca's face. You what? She was there. Feeding pigeons on a bench. Lily ran up to her. Rebecca turned to face him fully. What did she say? She told me she used to work for you. That you fired her 3 years ago. Without explanation and without a reference. And Daniel, is it true? Rebecca's jaw tightened. It's complicated. Then uncomplicate it for me. I don't have to explain my personnel decisions to you. The words came out sharp, defensive. Daniel had rarely heard Rebecca use that tone with him. It told him more than she probably intended. She's homeless, Rebecca. She's been living on the streets because she couldn't find another job. Because you wouldn't give her a reference. That's not my fault, isn't it? Rebecca grabbed her bag from the counter. I don't want to have this conversation right now. I'm tired and I have calls to make about the gala. This can't wait, Daniel said, standing up. I need to understand what happened. I found the recommendation letter in your files. The one you wrote but never gave her. Rebecca's eyes flashed with something between anger and panic. You went through my private office? You destroyed that woman's life. I think I have a right to know why. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then tell me. Explain it to me. They stood facing each other across the kitchen island, Lily between them in her high chair, oblivious to the tension. She banged her sippy cup on the tray, wanting attention, but neither parent moved. I had my reasons, Rebecca finally said, her voice tight. What reasons? Private reasons? Not good enough. Rebecca's composure cracked. Fine, you want to know? I thought she was sleeping with you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel stared at his wife, trying to process what she'd just said. You thought what? I thought you were having an affair with her, Rebecca said, the words tumbling out now. I found messages between you two. Text messages about meetings, about surprises, about keeping things quiet. And you were gone all the time, and when you were home you were distracted. And Helen was always there, always in the house, always so helpful and perfect. Rebecca, I know that now, Rebecca cut him off. But at the time I was convinced. I was a mess. Do you even remember what was happening 3 years ago? Really remember? Daniel thought back. 3 years ago. He tried to see past the blur of airports and hotel rooms. Your father was sick. My father was dying, Rebecca corrected him. Early onset dementia at 62 years old. Watching him forget my mother's name, forget who I was. And my mother, she was calling me every day, crying, asking for help. And I'd just had the miscarriage. Daniel felt like he'd been punched. The miscarriage? I was pregnant, Daniel, for about 8 weeks. I didn't tell you because you were in the middle of that merger negotiation. And I wanted to wait until the second trimester to be sure. But I lost it. And you didn't even notice. You came home from London and I'd just come back from the hospital. And you asked if I was feeling okay and I said I had a flu. And you believed me. Daniel's throat felt tight. Why didn't you tell me? Because you weren't there. Not really. Your body was there sometimes, but your mind was always somewhere else. Always on the next deal, the next meeting, the next thing. So you fired Helen. I fired Helen because I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore, Rebecca said. And now there were tears in her eyes. I was on medication for anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. My mother kept calling and telling me to watch out for young women around my husband. And I saw those texts and I just snapped. I needed her gone. I needed to feel like I had control over something. Daniel moved around the island toward his wife, but she held up a hand, stopping him. Don't, she said. Let me finish. By the time I realized I'd made a mistake, that those texts were about you planning my birthday party, that there was never any affair. It had been weeks. I knew I'd destroyed her career over nothing, over my own paranoid breakdown. And I was so ashamed. I couldn't face what I'd done. So I just didn't. I told myself she'd be fine, that people bounce back. I buried it. You buried it by letting her become homeless. I didn't know that would happen, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. I thought she'd find another job. I didn't know she'd fall so far. You could have checked. You could have reached out. I know. Don't you think I know that? Rebecca wiped her eyes angrily. Every time I write a check for charity, every time I plan one of these galas to help people in need, I think about her. I think about how I'm trying to help strangers when I destroyed someone who worked in my own house. Lily started to whimper, picking up on the emotional tension. Daniel lifted her out of the high chair and held her close. She wrapped her arms around his neck and stuck her thumb in her mouth. What are we going to do? He asked quietly. We? Rebecca looked at him. This is my mistake. We're married. Your mistakes are my mistakes, especially when I was so absent that you went through all that alone. Rebecca slumped against the counter. I don't know what to do. What can I do? How do you fix something like this? We start by giving her that reference letter. And an apology. A real one. She'll hate me. She might, Daniel agreed. But we still have to try. We have to make this right, whatever that looks like. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, but I need time to figure out how. I can't just show up and throw money at her. That would be insulting. I gave her my number. I told her to call me tomorrow. Of course you did, Rebecca said, but there was no anger in it now. Just resignation. She didn't ask for anything, Daniel said. She was very clear about that. She just told me what happened. She's been working on getting back on her feet on her own. That makes it worse somehow, Rebecca whispered. That she's not asking for help. That she's just surviving. Daniel shifted Lily to his other hip. His daughter had calmed down, her breathing soft against his neck. We're going to fix this, he said. Together. What if she doesn't want our help? Then we'll have to convince her. But Rebecca, we can't just walk away from this now. Not now that I know. Rebecca nodded. She looked older suddenly, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. I've made a lot of mistakes, she said quietly. But this one I need to fix. We'll fix it, Daniel said again. But you need to be prepared. This might not be easy. It might be messy and complicated and uncomfortable. I know. And it might change things between us. Rebecca met his eyes. I know that too. They stood in the kitchen as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, holding their daughter between them, both understanding that their lives had just gotten a lot more complicated. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, unchanged. But inside their perfect house, something had shifted. Daniel thought about Helen on that park bench, feeding pigeons with bread she probably could barely afford. He thought about the years she'd lost, the life that had been taken from her by one person's moment of fear and pride. And he knew that whatever came next, whatever it took to make this right, they had to do it. Not just for Helen, but for themselves. For Lily, who would grow up watching how her parents handled their mistakes. The phone Daniel had given Helen his number to sat in his pocket, waiting. Tomorrow she would call or she wouldn't. Either way, the conversation had started. There was no going back now. Helen didn't call on Sunday. Daniel checked his phone obsessively all day, jumping at every notification, but none of them were from her. By Monday morning, he'd convinced himself she wouldn't reach out at all. Maybe she'd decided it was better to let the past stay buried. Maybe she didn't trust him. Maybe she'd just been being polite when she took his card. He was in a budget meeting when his phone finally buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Hello, Mr. Chen? This is Helen from the park. Daniel felt relief wash over him. Helen, thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if you would. I almost didn't. Her voice was quiet, cautious. But I thought about what you said. About wanting to help. And I've been on the streets long enough to know you don't turn down a genuine offer. Can we meet? Today, if possible. I'd like to talk to you about some things I found out. There was a pause. What kind of things? Things about why you were fired. Things my wife told me. Another pause, longer this time. She knows you talked to me? Yes, and she wants to make things right. We both do. Helen laughed, but it sounded hollow. Make things right. What does that even mean? Why don't we meet and discuss it? Are you free this afternoon? There's a diner on 4th Street. I could meet you there at 2. I work at the laundromat until 3. After your shift then. 3:30? Helen hesitated, then agreed. Daniel spent the rest of his meetings distracted, his mind already at that conversation. When he told his assistant he was leaving early, she looked surprised. Daniel rarely left the office before 7, but some things were more important than quarterly projections. The diner was old-fashioned, the kind with red vinyl booths and a counter where regulars sat drinking coffee and reading newspapers. Daniel got there early and chose a booth in the back, away from the windows. He ordered coffee and waited. Helen arrived exactly at 3:30, still wearing what looked like work clothes, her hair damp around the edges like she'd splashed water on her face. She slid into the booth across from him, her movements careful, uncertain. Thank you for coming, Daniel said. I almost didn't, she admitted. I've learned to be careful about hope. It's dangerous when you have nothing. A waitress came by and Daniel ordered them both the daily special without asking. Helen looked like she might protest, then didn't. When the waitress left, they sat in awkward silence for a moment. So, Helen finally said, what did your wife tell you? Daniel took a breath. She told me she fired you because she thought you were having an affair with me. Helen's eyes widened. What? She found text messages between us about planning her birthday party, but she misunderstood them. She was going through a very difficult time. Her father was dying. She'd just had a miscarriage she hadn't told me about. She was on anxiety medication and not thinking clearly. Helen sat back against the booth, her face unreadable. A miscarriage. She knows now that she was wrong, that there was never anything inappropriate between us, and she's deeply ashamed of what she did. Ashamed, Helen repeated flatly. She's ashamed. I know that doesn't fix anything. You're right. It doesn't. Helen's voice was hard now, harder than it had been in the park. I lost everything because she was ashamed. I slept in my car for 2 months. I got assaulted at a shelter. I stood in line for food while people I used to work with walked past me on the street and pretended not to see me. And she was ashamed? The waitress brought their food. Neither of them moved to eat it. You're right to be angry, Daniel said quietly. What happened to you was wrong. Completely wrong. And I'm not here to make excuses for my wife. Then why are you here? Because I want to know what would make this right. Or at least better. I can't give you back 3 years of your life. But maybe there's something we can do. Helen looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Why do you care, really? You didn't know me then. You barely remember me now. I'm nothing to you. You're not nothing, Daniel said. You worked in my house. You helped my wife when she needed it. And then you were thrown away like trash, and I was so wrapped up in my own world that I never even noticed. That makes it my responsibility, too. I don't want your pity. I'm not offering pity. I'm offering to make amends. Your wife should be here, not you. She will be, when you're ready. But I wanted to talk to you first. To hear what you need. Helen picked up her fork and pushed the food around her plate. What I need, she said slowly, is my life back. My career, my apartment, my dignity. Can you give me those things? I can try to help with some of them. How? Daniel pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is the reference letter my wife wrote for you 3 years ago. The one she never gave you. I made copies of it. I also brought a new letter, updated and notarized, stating that you worked for us for 14 months and that your termination was due to no fault of your own. Helen took the envelope but didn't open it. What's the catch? No catch. These are yours, whether you want anything else from us or not. I don't believe in free lunches. Neither do I, usually. But this isn't a free lunch. This is a debt being paid. Helen opened the envelope and read the letters. Daniel watched emotions flicker across her face. Anger, sadness, something that might have been relief. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. 3 years ago, this letter would have changed everything, she said. I could have gotten a job. Kept my apartment. Stayed on track, I know. Do you? Helen's voice cracked. Do you really know what it's like to have everything stripped away? To go from being a professional to being invisible? To have people look through you like you don't exist? No, Daniel said honestly. I don't, and I won't pretend to. Helen wiped her eyes roughly. I'm not going to cry. I've done enough crying. It's okay if you do. No, it's not. She folded the letters carefully and put them back in the envelope. If I start crying about what happened, I might not stop. And I need to keep moving forward. That's all I can do. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the diner hummed with ordinary life. Someone's burger order was up. A couple in the next booth was arguing quietly about money. The coffee machine hissed and gurgled. There's something else, Daniel said. I found records of payments made to an H. Martinez account 3 months after you were fired. 2 payments of $5,000 each. Did you receive those? Helen frowned. No, I never got any money from your wife after my last paycheck. Then where did that money go? Maybe there's another H. Martinez. It's not an uncommon name. Daniel made a mental note to investigate that further. My wife also wants to meet with you. To apologize in person, but only when you're ready. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that. That's fair. There's no rush. Helen finally picked up her fork and took a bite of food. She ate like someone making up for missed meals. And Daniel quietly signaled the waitress to bring a container for the rest. When Helen finished, he had the waitress pack up the remaining food. There's one more thing, Daniel said. My company is hiring for an administrative position. Executive level. It's a real job, not charity. You'd have to interview and compete with other candidates. But with your experience and these reference letters, you'd be a strong contender. Helen set down her water glass carefully. You're offering me a job.